Who's a psychologist backstage, and I'd like to have her come out because we're getting into the whole therapy side. Will you please come out, Dr. Mandel? Thanks for being here. Have a seat. All right, so you've been listening. I mean, I think it's frustrating to hear that she gets put on Prozac, but that's better than having the feelings. I mean, what are the typical feelings that someone goes through in this kind of a violation?
Well, as you were mentioning, there's a lot of shame that usually begins for a victim, and it's
now, stop me right there. Why do victims feel ashamed? Like, you guys did absolutely nothing wrong. These guys are scumbags.
You're absolutely right, and it's so important to understand that, but our minds want to make it as though it's our fault. We're always looking for fault, and it's so easy to blame ourselves because we have us right in front of us. And a lot of times we're helpless. You know, when a victim becomes a victim, you have no power. And so you're actually put in a more childlike position. Somebody has taken away your power. And so you don't think to blame the perpetrator. You think, I must have done something wrong, just like a child does when parents are fighting.
Wow. You guys are all nodding your head like that totally makes sense to you. What about in the case of Jolene, where it's a violation that might on the surface not seem as bad to people? Oh, he stuck a camera under your skirt, but clearly to a woman that's a huge infringement of her sense of safety and being able to walk down the street, stand at a public place.
You know, for healing, we have to really not think in terms of what was bigger, what was smaller. A violation is a violation, and each person processes that differently. And it's so important to not compare to someone else. Oh, this happened to you, it was bigger, and so therefore my feelings shouldn't matter. It's another common thing that women do is downsize their feelings like they're not as important because somebody else has had it worse.
That's important.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think this happens to so many women. I mean, that's why I think it's great that you guys are sharing it. I mean, I think there's so many violations of women's privacy. Let's talk about the guys for a second. I mean, I think it's easy for me to stand here and be like, what scumbags, because they are. But the truth is, there's a lot of guys who do this stuff out there, and they just don't get caught. What is going through their heads that they want to do this?
Well, first of all, these perpetrators, they have a disregard for another person's feelings. They have a disregard for another person's right to privacy. There's a level of entitlement, like, hey, this belongs to me. I don't have to care about what the consequences of my behavior are. And also, there's this risk element. And as a voyeur maybe starts out in teenage years, you know, trying to scam on the women's locker room, the girls' locker room at school, you know, and that's a one-time deal. You know, their friends say.
Most guys do when they're teenagers.
Yeah, and to be considered a voyeur, though, this has to be repeated behavior that gets increasingly more severe, and the risk gets higher, and there's an inability to have normal relationships with people. These people tend to get very socially isolated. They don't have friendships. Sometimes you hear of a case where somebody is happily married. Well, believe me, there's a lot of problems there.
So should these guys be in jail or getting counseling?
Well, I
mean, it's interesting. Let me just interrupt you for a second, because it's something that you said, essentially, that you were happy this guy was ordered to get some kind of psychiatric treatment that made you happy.
The sad reality is that most voyeurs do not want treatment. They do not seek treatment, and when they're prompted to have to get treatment because it's court-ordered, they don't do very well. So there is a class of voyeurs who actually do feel some remorse, and they are more susceptible to treatment and sometimes medication. In some ways, this has been looked at as sexual addiction, and there are certain medications that will actually help decrease the level of arousal, and then there are behavioral therapies that kind of shock the person out of being aroused by those kinds of images.
All right, well, I want to thank you for giving us that insight, Jack. Go ahead.